Hello, this is Dean Homiuni. I'm the president and founder of 3D Action Video Inc. And we just got back from Cozumel. We used the GoPro 3D unit. We're going to discuss some of the issues about what we believe are the best settings to have that camcorder on and why to always film using 2.7K narrow, not medium and not wide angle view. And I also, in the end, I wound up liking the raw settings much better. We're also going to discuss real quick the backscatter filter, and I didn't particularly like it in the end. And then we're also going to discuss some recommendations that we have for GoPro as far as integrating an electronic red filter into the GoPro camera the way Canon has. So probably the biggest thing is we're going to show everybody how to film in 2.7K and keep that wide angle look where the film is going to be flat and be able to bring that film into a 1920 by 1080 environment and still be able to keep the perspective. And we're also going to discuss why we believe the Adobe Premiere Pro Vision 3 Imaging Inc. 3D solution and Boris Continuum Complete Boris FX9 is the way to go to really get super high quality film. We liked a lot of things about the camera, and there were other things we didn't like, but we'll go ahead and wind up discussing those. So the first thing is people wind up taking a GoPro and they set it on a 1920 by 1080 and they do these super wide view angles, and that creates that fisheye or kind of bubble look, and that's not really professional, and that's not something that we can wind up using in our productions. So if you wind up going back to our website, I mean, we're into everything. We're into movies, 3D movies. We're into video on demand. We now have a library of over 40 some movies that we've acquired or we're actually producing. We're in the IP television stations. We have our online store, and we also have our online training, including the GoPro filming guide, which we're going to do an extensive update. This 200-page book, which has 20 video tutorials on it, we're going to add another 5 or 6 to show you how to get that great footage with the GoPro and the things that we learned on the last trip and the great things about the 3D unit and some of the drawbacks. And then, of course, that we're releasing on November 1st our 3D theaters for aquariums. This is a 2-year project, which took a lot of time and a tremendous amount of personal effort, including learning how to film effectively in 3D. And then, as everybody knows, on June 21st, we released our Explore the Sea module, which is over 400 web pages. So an example, you can come to the hunters and click on the great white sharks, and we have a write-up of the great white sharks and some pictures, and then we link it to our VOD movie. So we're kind of going in multiple directions, including bring up our stock footage module by the end of the year that we're going to let school kids be able to download the 2D footage for free and wind up using such on their non-commercial projects, because we believe it's really important that kids begin to create content, and that's always been the main push of our business, is to get people to get a really good introduction to the underwater world. So let's get started about the tips and tricks that we have and some of the cool things that you can wind up really doing with a GoPro. Well, the first thing is GoPro has got multiple settings. It has a 1920 by 1080, it has a 1440 setting, and it has a 2.7K setting. And that 2.7K gives you that wide angle look. Now the width of your screen has gone from 1920 pixels to 2700 pixels, and you just get a lot more real estate and a lot better look. So on the screen right now, we have this scene. I'm going to blank out the top picture. This is what that footage looks like in 1920 by 1080. And GoPro turns around and talks about that you should shoot in 2.7K, because then when you bring it into a 1920 by 1080 timeline, it crops it down and you can do it for stabilization. Well, guess what, folks? We're going to show you how to get that 2.7K film and bring it into a 1920 by 1080 timeline. If I come here under the properties, under that footage, guess what? We got an image size 1920 by 1080, but we got that 2.7K wide angle look, and this is a home run. Let me repeat this. This is a home run with this camera. I want everybody to understand right now, filming at 2.7K and getting it into a 1920 by 1080 format for a wide angle look without a fisheye is a home run. So I just want to emphasize this. So everybody goes, how do we do it? And I'll tell you what, I was down in Mexico filming, and we decided to film in 2.7K, and I brought it in to combine it with 1920 by 1080 film, and it cropped my footage. And I was ready to faint. So I turned around, went out on the web, and I started reading articles from GoPro, and GoPro recommended filming at the 2.7K because you can then wind up getting better stabilization out of the footage when it crops it. And I said, that is not what I wanted. I did not want this film to be cropped, and I did not want it to go from 2.7K in this view to 1920 by 1080. Now, some of the advantages of using Premiere Pro, along with the Vision 3 Imaging Inc. 3D editing system, and of course we extensively use Boris FX and BCC9 as part of our tool sets. It's discussed in the GoPro guide why we use those tools and why they're so great. There's a couple advantages. One, you don't have to bring it into the GoPro Cineform solution and convert it to their AVI file. And that is a massive benefit. So in other words, I can bring my GoPro files, which are shot native with the camera, and just import it directly. So I'll come down into my Windows Explorer, and I'm going to go just get some of that native 2.7K film that we shot with. I'm just waiting for my data directory. I'll go to my 3D footage, and I'll go to Mexico, and I'll go to GoPro Cozumel 2.7K. And these are the native files that was shot with GoPro. And if I just want to bring this in the Premiere Pro, I just drag it in. I mean, I don't have to go through any conversion process, absolutely nothing, to be able to wind up doing those particular procedures. And that film comes right into my timeline. Here it is right here. It's just right in the window. So I can bring it down and slide it in and do what I want with it. I don't have to turn around and go through that AVI conversion program that's part of the Cineform software, which proves extremely problematic, because what happens is if you go to the highest settings, it's going to take that MP4 file and it's going to balloon it up to 10 times the size. And you got to wait for it, sit around and wait for it to do the conversion process. So you're wasting a tremendous amount of time, and you're having, let's say, a 300 meg file going to 3 gigs. And by bringing it in the Premiere Pro, just reading that file directly, you don't have to go through that process. And once again, you can just drag the file and bring it down on your timeline. And then, of course, we use the Vision 3 Imaging Inc. system to link the left and right eyes on video track 2 and 1. And that just provides a lot more flexibility and a lot more tools. And the Vision 3 Imaging Inc. system works with Boris Continuum Complete 9 and all the tools that are integrated to Adobe Premiere Pro. So that's the first advantage of using this Adobe Premiere Pro Vision 3 Imaging Inc. integrated system along with Boris Continuum Complete. You don't have to go through the conversion process, and you don't have to balloon up these files, and you're going to be working with this GoPro film in an industrial environment. So let's go on to our next thing, which is how did we get that 2.7K into a 1920 by 1080 timeline? And what happens is I got a timeline here, which is the 2.7K footage. And this is native footage, which is sitting here. It's on a timeline. If I go to sequence and I go to sequence settings, that you can see it's set to 2704 by 1536, which is the GoPro film. It'll automatically do it for you based on the first clip that you bring into the sequence. And one of the things that happens is that if you bring the 2.7K footage into a sequence, and we'll just pick this particular, let's say, last clip in the sequence, and then I go and I bring in some GoPro 1920 by 1080 footage, and I'm just going to come into my film, and I'll go to underwater, and I'll go to my GoPro Cozumel, and I'll just bring in one of the clips real quick. And I bring that footage in. What it does is it crops that footage, and you can see what happens. And now, of course, if I wind up ballooning it up, that's going to create a problem, especially if I go to the fit screen. We now see that we have the 2.7K film, and then when I bring in the 1920 by 1080, it's a problem, and I can expand it out, but I'm going to lose the clarity of the film. And frankly, for Blu-rays and everything's rendered at 1920 by 1080, not 2.7K anyway. But we can clearly see, based on this, how much wider and how much more expansive that 2.7K film is. It's just taking up a lot more real estate. So originally, when I filmed the 2.7K, I was combining it with 1920 by 1080 footage, and I was getting that 2.7K film cropped, and I panicked. So I started to play around with the programs, and guess what? If you come along and set up a timeline and you define it as 1920 by 1080 in the first clip, I do that by just bringing in a preliminary clip. Here was a 1920 by 1080 picture film with the backscatter film. If I bring that in, that flags the sequence as being a 1920 by 1080. So once again, if I go to sequences and I go to my settings, we can see it's a 1920 by 1080 film. Well, in desperation and playing around with the footage, what happened was I came in and I said, well, what if I try to resize the film? So I came along to the 1920, I'm back to the GoPro 2.7K film. If I double click on this footage and I start to shrink it down to a similar size as the way that it's going to appear if I bring it into, i.e. the size of a 1920 by 1080 film, which is combined with the 2.7K timeline. You don't have to be exactly opposite here. You can bring it in. I now have shrunk this film down, and if I wind up going edit and copy that footage, and I bring it into that 1920 by 1080 line, and I go edit, paste, guess what? It brings in that film with the same size as the same perspective it had under the 2.7K filming, but I now have that film into a 1920 by 1080 timeline. Of course, if I come in here and I go and I look at my properties on that footage, it still shows 2700 by 1536. So it's still saying, well, it's 2700K film. But guess what? I did a test. When I take that footage and I render it, like here's the footage right here. When I render it, when I bring that 2.7K film, and then I render it out, and I go see, and I come into the properties of that clip, which I'll come in right now. Guess what? It has that wide angle look, and it's 1920 by 1080 after I rendered that film. This is amazing, guys, and this is a home run. Like I said, this is a home run. What that means is when you apply stabilization tools, which are going to crop the footage, and you apply things like the BCC lens correction filter, which is made for the GoPro that crops the footage also, you're still going to have that wide real estate to work with. And I wanted to make sure that I wound up getting this video tutorial out to show everybody the way that we're doing this. And this is a huge advantage of using the Adobe Premiere Pro along with the Vision 3 Imaging Inc. system to do your 3D editing along with the Boris Complete tools, because this just creates a home run. You don't have to convert to those AVI files and get those gigantic files. You don't have to waste time going over the conversion process. And of course, part of the training and the additional tutorials that we're going to release, we're like going to go over all the tools in detail, even though we already go over a lot of them as part of the current GoPro guide already, along with the video tutorial. So if you go to our online training and our GoPro filming guide, we discuss a tremendous amount of subjects in here, and I recommend everybody go take a look at this fantastic product. It's only $99, and it's great for the school kids that we're going to drop it to $19.95 and give them access to the 2D footage so they can really start doing some wonderful projects here. So anyway, that's our little first tip and trick I want everybody to understand. And once again, when you bring that 2.7K film in, even though it says 2.7K, when you render it at the 1920 by 1080, it renders it to 1920 by 1080, but keeps that wide angle look. Now we were going to do the entire series, additional video tutorials, and go over how the stabilization tools and everything else is really great, but we are having a little problem with multiple stabilization tools, including the Adobe Warp Stabilizer and Boris Continuum Complete Optical Stabilizer and the stabilization tool in Tiffin DFX. And I'll play a little thing, and I know that Boris Yamzinski, the president and founder of Boris FX, we've already sent him this footage. I know him on a very personal level, and they're taking a look at what the solution's going to be. And I'll just play this clip for you and point out what's going on. So if we come in here, and it's just a little short clip, in fact, let me just bring up another piece of film, and we'll talk about what these issues are. I'll go to my underwater footage, and I'm going to go to my GoPro, and I have sorry, I'm going to have to come back to everybody on that particular issue. That we'll talk about the stabilization issues later on. So anyway, one of the things that we're having regarding the stabilization, which is causing a problem. I'm going to bring some film that I applied the stabilization routines to and bring it in the timeline, and we'll just play this for a little while in here, and we're going to see some of the issues. So you notice the film gets a wobble in it. And when we're applying these stabilization routines, all of a sudden you're getting this distortion in the film. And I think it's because on this particular film, we filmed at 1920 by 1080 with a medium view to it. And that fisheye angle is really causing a lot of problems with the film. And I know Boris FX is going to wind up taking a look at it. One of the other things we're going to talk about in the subsequent tutorials is the BCC lens correction filter, which was really made for the GoPro. And what this does is you can rotate the film to get it level. So in here, if you're half cocked, I can rotate it by a certain degree, and then I can, let's say, go 103 or 105 to really expand that film, and then I can level my film off. And that's why it's really important to film in 2.7K, because you're filming with the GoPro, especially on topside shots, without the advantage of a monitor, because you can't put a monitor on the thing. And almost every topside shot that we used the GoPro to film with, I had to wind up using this lens correction tool to do the rotation on. And that's one of the advantages of filming with the 2.7K, because when you rotate that film to level it off, it's going to crop it a little. And then when you also do image stabilization, it's also going to crop the film a little more also. So we have sent this to Boris Continuum Complete, and I set it to name Helmley and Adobe because we're having the same problem with the Adobe Warp Stabilizer. And like I said, the Tiffin DFX is also having the problem. And we're hoping that they're going to develop a solution here relatively quickly. And I think it's going to come from the lens correction filter to find out that correct setting to set it on. So an example is you can come into the lens correction and actually change the bending of that film, which is what the tool was used for. And I think it's only going to be a matter of finding that correct setting to have that set on, so that when we apply the stabilization routine, that the film is going to be set at that correct angle to get rid of the fisheye look. And once again, that's why we're recommending you film at 2.7K narrow look, so you have absolutely no fisheye bend to that film, so that when you apply the stabilization tools, you're not going to wind up having to worry about that distortion that happens. So that's why I just wanted to get something out really, really quick to explain to everybody how to bring this 2.7K film in and wind up getting that wide angle look. And we're going to have probably another hour to an hour and a half of video tutorials going over a lot of these issues regarding the GoPro and what settings to have it on. And we hope that you're going to enjoy the additional supplemental videos that we're going to put into our underwater filming guide using a GoPro from start to finish.